Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Good morning, everybody. I am going to talk about what a trauma bond is, because this comes up a lot. It gets used. It's a term to which many people refer, and there are, I wouldn't say misunderstandings, but very, very, very shallow understandings of what a trauma bond is. And trauma bonds are so elegant and so self-referencing that they almost become cyclical or confusing to describe. And there's an existential or spiritual or philosophical possibility or component that comes with them that I think maybe I won't talk about today. Today, I'll just talk mechanistically about what a trauma bond actually is. And I know I've referred to this in other podcasts, but I'm just going to do this podcast just on describing and trying to give you 2 or 3 models of what it is. So let's just start with the basic understanding, the way most people use trauma bond. When most people talk about a trauma bond, what they mean is they have their own trauma that's pretty seductive to talk about. It's painful. It tends to dominate their life. And they meet someone else who has the same thing, and you bond with this person. They become a friend or a romantic partner or whatever because you have this deep, sort of profound struggle that you both share. You both feel heard and understood. There's someone else who has gone through something really difficult that has symptoms and outcomes that maybe a lot of people don't understand, because there are some things people can understand the existence of the trauma, but there are lots of people who really have no idea what it does to your nervous system, and that what it does to your nervous system doesn't just go away. You live with it as part of your reality often. So that's really what most people consider a trauma bond, is just both of you have trauma. The trauma is seductive because you don't get a lot of understanding from society or from people, and you found someone who's lived through some similar things. You find that you can relate to each other, and you end up bonding and feeling very close because you have something intense and difficult to talk about in which you receive understanding. That's the beginning of a trauma bond. And it has all of the, inside that seed or that kernel of a trauma bond, it has the DNA of a full-blown trauma bond. But that's not really what it is. Then you get to the next level of an understanding, and a lot of people who have been to couples therapy or been to therapy or are aware that they've had a difficult childhood, and they understand that that difficult childhood has created triggers for them where they have these unreasonable fight or flight responses, and there's this meaning that they make of it. And often people get this understanding when we're talking about a romantic relationship, a marriage, whatever, and they understand that their partner triggers their trauma, and that when they get triggered, then their partner gets triggered, and then that they cycle on each other, and neither one of them is in a reasonable state of mind, and that they fight, and they're both in fight or flight, and they're not being reasonable, and they're not really able to navigate the conflict. And in fact, the trauma conflict begins to overwhelm what the initial disagreement was about. So they have enough insight that they begin to realize, oh, we have these legitimate disagreements or conflicts, but it turns into both of us having a trauma response, and then we're unable to navigate it. So there's that level of understanding, and I think that's a reasonable understanding of a trauma bond, especially if you're not a therapist or a psychologist. And that's a pretty insightful understanding. It's an important understanding that you're being taken over by your trauma and that you're triggering one another, and you may need a couples therapist, or you may need your own trauma therapy to work through why you get triggered and are unable to navigate that. But this is the part where it gets kind of existential or spiritual. That's not really what a trauma bond is. And when I describe this, there will be complex trauma therapists and trauma therapists who agree with me. And there may even be therapists who are unaware, who maybe they don't specialize in deep trauma or childhood trauma or whatever, who don't really know this. But I'm going to describe to you what an actual trauma bond is, and you will see why it has spiritual connotations. Maybe those are not even connotations. Maybe it's a spiritual lesson or learning, but I will not seek to address that in today's podcast episode. Okay, this gets hard because it's self-referencing, so I'm going to try to describe it in concrete terms. Let's say this woman, Sharon, I'm just making up a name, was deeply, deeply traumatized. She had parents who did not physically abuse her, but they were severely negligent, emotionally deeply suppressed, cold, didn't respond to her emotional needs at all. If she was being bullied at school, or if she had any conflict, or if she was sad or angry, or she felt any normal range of emotions, especially for a child, her parents would become very cold and distant, and they would criticize her and shut her down and say, "What's wrong with you? And we really feel that you're just making a big deal about nothing, and you need to work on these things." And so she grew up deeply traumatized, emotionally, psychologically abandoned by parents who never hugged her, never connected with her, never reflected back what her reality was. So she's badly traumatized. She has complex trauma from this experience. So to simplify, she developed in response to that trauma, rather than self-suppressing, she became even more pronounced in expressing, because it was sort of her way of rebelling and fighting back against these extremely cold parents who dismissed anything that had any emotional coloration whatsoever, other than maybe just confidence or calm. You were not allowed to be angry. So she developed these things in a way of unconsciously trying to elicit connection with her parents and to attempt to tease out some kind of emotional reflection or mirroring of her own experiences. And the colder and the more detached and the more critical they were, the more she unconsciously turned up her emotions. And so she grew up, and her trauma response is to become more verbal, more intense, more emotional, in an attempt to elicit some emotional connection. So for her, emotional connection unconsciously became coded as, you must have emotions, you must have intense emotions, you must see mine, you must acknowledge mine, you must have your own, we must share those. Got it? Okay, so that's Sharon. Extremely cold, suppressed parents. She develops strong emotions as a trauma response in an attempt to connect to these parents who emotionally abandon her. And her trauma response and coping is to intensify how she feels and to become more expressive and more intense. Okay? Randomly out in the world, there's this guy we'll call Alex. All right, so Sharon and Alex. Now, Alex was physically abused by parents who had no self-containment, who were very narcissistic and felt totally entitled to anything they felt. Any emotion they felt seemed like reality to them. And so if dad was having a bad day and came home frustrated, if you made one wrong move, he would lose his temper, and he felt totally entitled to that. He felt that you had done something really offensive and defiant and disrespectful, and he would rage and get really angry and hit or whip out of control, leave bruises, yell, accuse. And Alex's mom, same thing. When she felt sad or depressed, she would sulk and become insulting and demanding and demand that Alex attend to her, and would make him go make her tea. And if he made a mistake, as young as like 6 or 7, if he made a mistake, spilled the tea or whatever, she would scream at him as if he'd done something offensive. So whatever mom felt, she felt totally entitled to those feelings. And as far as she was concerned, those feelings indicated reality. So if Alex even accidentally did something wrong, she would rage at him, yell, hit. And so he lived in this arbitrary, inconsistent environment in which whatever his parents felt, the more intense it was, the more it was his fault. And they would hit him, yell at him, and insult him. And this left no space for his emotions. So he developed unconsciously, as a rebellion against mom and dad, as a fuck you against mom and dad, strong self-containment. And the more out of control and childishly they behaved, the more he disciplined himself into an adult contained behavior. And the more he got triggered, the more level and even he talked, because when he was doing it, he was proving to himself and trying to prove to his parents, this is how you should be. If you're not being this, you're behaving badly. What you're doing is unfair and unjust. And I'm being level and I'm being calm and you're being out of control. And so even though you could see his self-containment maybe as a healthy response, it is in fact a trauma response designed to try to elicit calm and connection from his parents, who were arbitrary, super intense, explosive, and emotionally unpredictable. So his calmness isn't a healthy calm of someone who's well regulated. It's someone who's dysregulated, who's desperately trying to elicit calm and connection and something fair and reasonable from his parents. And the more intense they get, the quieter he gets. Right? So his trauma response, when he's triggered, he becomes very level, very even, and very suppressed and very self-contained. Okay. At this point, Sharon and Alex, you can probably see where this is going. Where there may be spiritual causes or existential causes, right? Psychiatrists and therapists, we often think of this as just psychological, that people choose something that reminds them of their childhood or something that is familiar, right? You could say, why would anyone who lived through 15, 20 years of that and hated every minute of it, why would they choose the same thing in a marriage or long-term friendships and romantic partnerships? Why would they do that? And psychologists and therapists will say, well, you know, it's familiar. Unconsciously, it matches their coping skills. It's what they know how to do. That might be true. I've said that 1,000 times if I've said it once. After doing my own work for about 20 years and then being a therapist for over a decade, I think it's spiritual. It's too freakishly consistent. Now, I'm not going to go into the arguments of that, and I'm not going to make this, like I said, I'm not going to go into how or why it might be spiritual. But what I will tell you is a person like Sharon and a person like Alex will choose each other every fucking time. Over and over and over. And as a therapist or as a friend or just someone with insight, if you explore the way their realities fit together and the way their trauma fits together and the way Alex's trauma response mirrors exactly Sharon's parental emotional abuse, which then elicits Sharon's trauma response, which mirrors exactly Alex's parents' emotional abuse. If you could spend 5 years exploring with them, and the way those two things match exactly, the coloration, the minor little details about the way it was done, the way in which Sharon's parents are cold and even, and they do it to prove that emotions are something dirty and bad and shouldn't be allowed. The way they do it will be exactly the way Alex has learned to respond to inappropriate and intense emotions. And the way Alex's trauma response and coping skill of being contained and even will look exactly like colorations, turns of phrases, the language that gets used will look exactly like how Sharon's parents behaved in this cold, detached, fearful, hateful way towards emotional expression. So that Sharon is left with no choice but to respond to Alex's behavior with her trauma response. It is so elegant and it fits so perfectly, it freaks you out. And I've been watching this for over a decade, doing lots and lots of couples work. It is wild how beautifully and elegantly someone's childhood trauma and their experiences with their parents and exact phrases and behaviors look exactly like their partner's coping skill in response to their parents. Okay, so let's get deeper. What this does is it puts these people in an inescapable conundrum. Because on one hand, they know their partner, they fell in love with them, they know them as a human being. They know them as this wonderful, loving, fun, interesting, intelligent human being who they enjoy. They know it. They know it. They know that that person exists. And also, when that person triggers, they turn into exactly their childhood nightmare. Exactly their childhood nightmare. And so there's that both of those people are set with this binary black and white view and experience of their romantic partner, of this person that they fell in love with and they love and that they know they want to be with, and then this other experience that they know from childhood that they never fucking ever wanted to experience again. And here they are experiencing it again. And their love for the other, their genuine love for and connection to the other person will drag them through months, years, decades of re-experiencing exactly the same experience that they were traumatized by in childhood. But some part of them will know, oh, my partner isn't my parent. They can go to therapy, they can work on that, and yet they have exactly the same trauma response to their partner's behavior because their partner's behavior imitates exactly the behavior of their parents. And they know about their parent. They can go to therapy and they can realize, oh my God, it's just that, you know, he gets triggered or she gets triggered, and I know he or she is just in their trauma and it's not about me. But it doesn't matter because their childhood trauma coping skill keeps jumping up, and it creeps into everything they say and everything they do, and their trauma coping skill triggers their partner's trauma coping skill, and their partner's trauma coping skill triggers theirs beautifully, elegantly, and exactly. That is what a trauma bond is. That is what a trauma bond is. So let's take Sharon and Alex and let's roll through a scenario, right? Let's take a pedestrian conflict. Alex has been busy at work. He's a bit stressed. He hasn't really discussed it with Sharon, but he's not sure. There's some layoffs. He's not sure if he's going to keep his job. He's pretty stressed. So he's been staying and working late. And then Sharon sort of made a little bit of a comment of like, hey, you've been working late a lot, and, you know, I'm not seeing you. And that set her up to really start feeling that abandonment. And so she had this real expectation the next day of she thought he would come home on time. And his boss kind of lit him up and told him he had a review coming up and that he better tighten things up. So now he's really triggered, and he stayed late, and he comes home, and there's a confrontation. Okay, this is a pedestrian, really no harm, no foul. If there was no trauma in this situation, these two loving people could talk about it, and Sharon could say, hey, I know you have a lot going on, and I mentioned it to you yesterday, but I wasn't super clear. So I want to tell you right now, I'm really, really starting to feel the lack of your presence. This is kind of hurting our relationship. I need to know what's going on. I need to understand. Help me understand what's going on and help me feel that we're still connected. What's going on? Like, I would love to see you at home. If she said something like that, someone who was not triggered could totally share, this has been going on. I'm afraid I might get laid off. My boss is really riding me. I'm super stressed. And it would become a bonding moment for them. And it would strengthen their relationship, right? So this is a pedestrian, non-destructive, non-toxic conflict that any non-traumatized or a highly trained, a couple who's been in couples therapy with a talented complex trauma therapist who's really trained them how to sidestep their trauma could totally navigate this. And there's no need for any identity accusations. There's no need for toxicity. There's no need for conflict. There's just a big opening there for understanding and reconnection and even strengthening of connection such that they feel even more connected than they did before the conflict. That's totally possible. It's a pedestrian situation. Can happen to anybody. Nobody's being a bad person here. But that's not what happens. Okay? And by the way, I'm not putting this on Sharon like someone starts it. It goes back and forth, and one person starts it, the other person, like, it doesn't matter. In a trauma bond, both people start it multiple times. It just loops, right? Okay, so let's go back to the scenario. Sharon kind of said something not super direct. She didn't stop him and really slow him down and go, hey, look, I'm starting to have trouble with how much you're working late. We need to talk about it. What's going on? She didn't do that, but she said enough that when he didn't come home on time the next day, it triggered her trauma, where it's like, I said something and I felt something about the situation, and all I'm getting is coldness and being ignored. So her trauma response kicked in. Now all of her years, 15, 20 years of her parents ignoring every emotion she ever had, ignoring anything that she said that was an expression of emotion, shaming her for it, suppressing her, leaving her alone and abandoned, all of that fear, anger, rage, and shame is boiling in there. Now she's a mature adult, so she's trying to contain it, but there it is, it's boiling in there, and it starts pushing the needle on, you know what, I love him, and he might have stuff going on, but he better fucking have something to say about, like, I'm not putting up with this shit. Okay, so now she's in the trauma spin, and her trauma coping mechanism, remember, her trauma coping mechanism is to intensify emotion, to attempt to be heard, and to try to elicit an emotional response from her partner or her parents in order to feel that she's connected. So, oh man, here we go. This is just a setup. So Alex comes home. He's tired. Now he's really stressed. His boss actually made some negative comments. He's really worried that he's going to lose his job. He needs some containment and some calm from his partner because he's struggling to maintain. And he comes home and they eat a quiet dinner that's sort of, he can kind of feel something's going on with Sharon. And she can't take it anymore. He hasn't said anything. He hasn't apologized. He hasn't explained. He hasn't acknowledged that she said something yesterday. And suddenly, as they're finishing up dinner, she doesn't exactly blow up, but she's pissed. And rather than starting with understanding, it comes out as, I cannot believe, after what I said yesterday, that you would think that it's okay for you to be 2 hours late again after like weeks of this. It's so clear. You literally, nothing I say means anything to you. Does anything I say mean anything to you? Okay, I'm like imitating the intensity, the emotional intensity, blah, blah, blah. Okay, she's in her trauma. From her perspective, he's only getting 1% because she's feeling decades of childhood trauma and suppression and rage and grief and abandonment and loneliness is all piling in there, pushing, and she's managing it and she's holding it down, being an adult and not flying off the handle and being like, you are a fucking cold asshole piece of fucking shit. Right? She's not doing that. Like, that's pushing up. She's not doing it. But he came home tired in his trauma, needing calm, and he gets this inexplicable silence at dinner and this sudden, terse, angry, accusatory, demanding an explanation when he's feeling vulnerable and fragile and exhausted and he's feeling beaten up. And this feels exactly like his entire childhood. I'm working as hard as I can. I'm doing everything that I can to make sure I'm doing my part. I never ask for anything. I'm level and I'm even all the time. I contain my own stuff. I help my wife contain her own stuff. And some arbitrary emotional shit that I have no idea where it comes from suddenly just explodes and I'm being attacked and an explanation is being demanded as if I'm somehow a fucking criminal. This is so arbitrary and so fucking unfair. And boom, he is, that rage and that anger is boiling up, and his trauma response of nothing good ever comes of people yelling, screaming, blah, 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 all of this intense emotion. And she needs to understand that I'm being kind and I'm always even and I always contain the situations and I don't deserve this. So his unconscious coping mechanism kicks in and he suddenly starts talking in this even tone, but it's full of judgment and the rage is coloring the whole thing. Sharon, I don't know where that came from. I'm here working my ass off, being respectful of you, doing everything I can to just keep things together. And I literally have no response. I don't know what to say to you. I'm going to go do the dishes. If you're tired or you had a hard day, I'm going to go do the dishes. Okay. From his perspective, totally righteous, totally just. He had this arbitrary attack with intense emotions, and he's unconsciously doing what he knows how to do. His trauma response is to unconsciously hint to the other person that they're being unjust and they're being a shitty person, and this is arbitrary and totally unjust and totally unjustified, and they should stop doing it. And he's sending a shame message of, I'm going to be the calm person. You don't seem to be handling your reality, and I'm going to take the dishes off your hands. I'm going to go do the dishes. And what do you think happens? Sharon hears the message. I'm being called unreasonable. I'm being told after the second time I say something that my words literally mean nothing. This narcissistic asshole doesn't give a shit what I'm saying at all. Not only that, he's doing that same condescending move where anything I feel, instantly I'm being shamed and being treated like I'm some mental patient, when all I'm doing is expressing that I want to connect to my partner. That's all I did, is expressing that I'm hurt, and he didn't pay attention. Oh, and now she loses her shit. Things that she said in her head or to her parents many, many times. You are fucking sick. You narcissistic, selfish, self-centered piece of shit. All I did was tell you that I miss you and I need to reconnect to you, and the only thing you can do is shame me and treat me like shit and go off and act like you're Mr. Calm, you fucking asshole, and you want to do the fucking dishes. Like, you won't even connect to me. You would rather wash dishes than fucking acknowledge that I was telling you that I'm fucking hurt and I miss you. You are a narcissistic, cold, selfish piece of fucking shit. She's lost it. But she still feels totally justified. How could he act that way? Okay, he's standing at the sink, doing the dishes, hearing this, and this deep terror overcomes him. Who did I fucking marry? Here I am working my job, maybe losing my job, needing emotional support, exhausted, getting shit on by my boss, trying to make sure that I hold up my end, coming home wanting to connect. And I get this arbitrary attack, demand for explanation, no kindness, no conversation. And then when I contain the situation, I contain myself, I contain for her, I even take the dishes off of her hand, and I just go and I calmly do the dishes. And I am literally being attacked, pathologized, insulted. How did this happen? I fucking married my mother and my father. And he stops for a minute, and he's shaking with rage. He thinks about continuing to do the dishes, but he realizes, no, I have to defend myself. And he sets the dishes aside, he turns around, and his voice is shaking because he's still containing, but the rage and also the trauma fear. And he says, I didn't realize it, but you're some version of my mother and my father. if you could see me come home from the week I've had, not speak to me, attack me, and then scream at me and call me a narcissist, making it all about you and accusing me of making it all about me. If you could do that, you literally need therapy and medication. You need help. I can't help you. You need help. You are sick. You are sick, and I'm not having this conversation. I'll sleep in the guest bedroom. I don't want to talk to you. Okay, I could go on and on and on. But I wanted to not only describe the model of how it fits together, but I also wanted you to see from the outside, if you're someone who has a trauma bond with a partner or a friend, to see from the outside how this pedestrian conflict that could totally be solved and even the relationship can be strengthened, that it starts with two people unconsciously already being in their disconnected, traumatized state with their coping skill, the first thing that they're leading with no matter what. And they both view their coping skill as a righteous, justified, in fact, a kind and connected way of being. So that when their unconscious coping mechanism falls flat and triggers the other person, they're only left with the reasonable assumption that I offered everything I had and that other person is fucking sick. I might love them, they might have wonderful qualities, but right now they are out of their fucking mind. I literally offered a just, righteous, loving, connected response to this situation, and all I got was attack and disconnection and insults. Both of them believe that 100%. Now, they might recognize some specific thing I probably shouldn't have said that, but the overall emotional content, as far as each of them is concerned, is righteous, is connected, and is a loving offering to their partner. But as is true of anyone in a temporarily traumatized state, they are each in a deeply narcissistic state where they literally have no fucking understanding of the other person, and they're each accusing the other one of being selfish, while they themselves are also being incredibly self-interested, incredibly self-understanding, and they have no fucking understanding of the other person. They don't understand who they married. They understand the loving parts, the sexy parts, the funny parts, the smart parts, the comforting parts, but they do not understand the parts of their partner that were crafted by parents who behaved exactly like their own coping mechanism. They do not understand their partner who was raised by abusive, negligent parents who act exactly like each person's own coping response, and they view their coping response as a connected, righteous response. And it might be in some situations, but it isn't when you marry the partner that you fucking married. It isn't empathetic or understanding when you married the partner you married. Now let's take it out of that more sort of complex psychological situation, and I'll give you another situation where you'll understand more of what I'm saying. let's take someone who was raised in a family that expressed love by roughhousing, and it was never meant with cruelty, but there was like wrestling, and every once in a while somebody would catch an elbow in the eye and get a black eye, and it'll be like, oh my God. They'd hug it out, be like, fuck it, whatever. Just this fun, rowdy, boisterous family, right? If you go marry someone who had parents who were physically abusive, who used physical interaction to humiliate and dominate, and you go, yeah, but it's just how I express love, you're an idiot. Don't marry that person then. Don't marry that person. If you want to live in a boisterous environment where people are okay with someone accidentally throwing an elbow and bruising your ribs and you're like, oh my God, it's all good, this is just how we express love, don't marry someone who was physically abused in childhood, because then you're the narcissistic asshole if you're like, well, I want to marry them, but I just want to keep being, well, no. You have to deal with what the situation actually is, not just with your ideal perception of what you want it to be. Now, you can have your ideal perception of what you want it to be, but you don't get to fall in love and marry that person. You don't get to fall in love and marry that person. And that person, let's say you roughhouse with your kids and your kids love it and, blah, blah, blah. That person also doesn't get to sit there and go, no, stop doing that. You're being too No. You married someone who grew up in a family who expressed love with roughhousing. You don't get to sit there and just be like, oh, I don't want this to happen. If your kids are not being hurt and they love the roughhousing, like, tough shit, get over it. It's not about you. Or you should not have married that person. Should's a stupid word. Because in the end, none of us who marry and create our trauma bond do it consciously. We don't recognize it, but we do it with infuriating consistency, with elegant and exacting similitude, like matching piece for piece perfectly. You know what, like nowadays with technology, they're able to machine stuff within a tiny micron of the tolerance is so exact that when you put two metal pieces together, you can't even see that there's a seam. It is so exact. That's what trauma bonds are like. They're so fucking exact. They're so exact. And those people are presented with a situation in which their partner's behavior is so beautifully, elegantly, exactingly designed to look exactly like their childhood abuse, that as they navigate that situation for years, sometimes decades, especially if they're children, they are offered an opportunity to raise their consciousness to an incredibly high level, because there is no other way to escape. You have a couple options. You can either recognize that you unconsciously chose someone, or there's some God who's like, hey, I want you to solve this fucking Rubik's Cube. Or you unconsciously chose it, and it's your job to raise your consciousness until you can see, oh my God, what I think of as a just, kind, connected response is not just, kind, and connected for this person that I chose. And when they behave in a way that's triggering for me, they think that they're being just, kind, and connected. And their behavior has nothing to do with me. It's just their unconscious childhood coping. So you can use the situation to learn and raise your consciousness, like it seriously expands your conscious awareness, or you need to be aware enough of the signature of the kind of emotional signature and choose someone who's your ideal, which is if you were raised in a roughhousing family, that's how you expressed affection, you better choose someone who's also comfortable with that, not someone who was physically abused as a child, or your marriage is going to be fucking nothing but misery and conflict. Or if the other person contains themselves and allows you to do that, but they're triggered the whole time, sooner or later they're going to leave you, because no one can live with the excruciating reality of constantly being triggered and not having the right to say or do something about it to alter the situation. No one can live with that forever. So you have these two options. You can use the situation to expand and raise and elevate your awareness so that you see the unconsciousness of those responses and you stop participating in them, right? The dialogue that I modeled at the beginning of two people just handling this pedestrian situation, right? Sharon could have just said, hey, I said something yesterday, but I realize you're really stressed and something's going on for you. And so I want to say more clearly today, I'm hurting a bit and I'm really missing you and I would like to reconnect, and maybe we do that by just talking about what's going on for you, if you need support, whatever, right? You can be someone who has a trauma response and have a trauma bond, and you can learn to say that. And when you say that, you have stopped operating within your trauma bond and you're eliciting and inviting conscious awareness on your partner's behalf. And then sooner or later, if they participate in this, they may begin to realize, oh, there's a way of talking. My way that I view as just, righteous, and a connected way of responding actually isn't, not for this person. Right? Just like the person who grew up expressing love by roughhousing thinks it's connected, but it's not for this person. What we think of as connection doesn't mean it's connection for specific individuals, right? So then Alex might begin to realize, oh, when I engage this behavior that I think is righteous, justified, connected, it isn't, not for this person. And this person realizes what I think of as righteous, connected, just, isn't, not for this person. You have to begin inventing behaviors and connected ways of being that do not engage these. Now, you probably need some trauma processing, but you don't have to process that trauma if you can consciously choose to speak in a way that avoids the engagement of that message and that energy that you view as conscious and just. But it's totally narcissistic because it's only conscious and just in response to childhood trauma, but it's not fair to this person because they're not your parent, and vice versa. Okay. It's pretty complex, and I can go on and on describing it, but I think that was a reasonable facsimile of, and it was a reasonable model and description of actual dialogue and things people say and how people walk into this deep, intense trauma bond. Now that is a real trauma bond. It's not just that you bonded over the fact that you both had trauma. It's not just that you both trigger each other. It is that, and I'll say it one more time, Sharon's childhood trauma and Alex's coping response look exactly the same, which leaves her feeling justified in activating her trauma coping response. And her trauma coping response, which she sees as totally justified, perfectly mirrors Alex's childhood trauma, which leaves him feeling totally justified and righteous in his trauma response. So there is no logical reason for either of these people to elevate their consciousness to see that those are not conscious states. They are not, because they don't factor in your partner's experience and what's going on for your partner. And they don't factor in that how you're behaving is the perfect cruelty for your partner. Your justified trauma response is the perfect cruelty for your partner. And your partner's justified trauma response is the perfect cruelty for you. And the only way to escape is to either choose someone better suited, or to expand and elevate your consciousness such that you see that what you think of as justified and connected is disconnected for your partner, is actually disconnected for you, because if you were connected, you wouldn't think it was okay for your partner. It is not justified or righteous or connected. It is, in fact, a deeply unconscious, psychological, compulsive trauma response. So you elevate your consciousness and you come to realize, oh, I no longer want to participate in this. Whether this relationship works or doesn't work, or whether we've done too much damage, or we have kids or we don't, it doesn't matter. I choose not to continue to lie to myself that this is a conscious, justified, reasonable response to a situation. It is, in fact, an unconscious compulsion in response to me demonizing my partner and turning them into my parents. Okay? That's the best explanation I got for what a trauma bond is. All right, you guys. Hope you have a wonderful day. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.